You've stepped into History Bound, where we saddle up and ride straight into the past. No shortcuts, no whitewash, just the trail as it truly ran from the folks who walked it.
I came west in '49 with a mule that didn't like me and a shovel that bent easy, same as most men did back then. Skinny, hopeful, and certain the good Lord had scattered gold along the creeks for anyone willing to kneel in the cold water and take it up. In those first years, the land didn't belong to companies or corporations, or men with clean hands and fine coats. It belonged to whoever got there first and worked hardest. A pan, a rocker, maybe a sluice box if you had the boards and knew how to set it right. You dug, you washed. You watched the bottom of the pan like it was scripture. Some days you found color, some days you didn't, but the river never lied to you, and the earth never tried to kill you for profit. That all changed, not sudden-like, not with gunfire or proclamations, but the slow way rot takes a beam. By the time the 1860s came around, the gold rush wasn't really over, but it wasn't ours anymore either. At first, water was our partner. You needed it to wash the dirt and coax the gold loose from the gravel. Then men figured out how to turn water into a weapon. They called it hydraulic mining, and the first time I saw one of those monitors set up, it looked like a cannon bolted to the hillside, fed by miles of ditch and flume and pressure pulled down from reservoirs high above. When they opened it, that stream hit the earth with such force, it peeled whole hillsides back like wet cloth. Trees vanished. Ancient gravel beds we'd never been able to touch came down in roaring waves of mud, stone, and gold. It was impressive to behold, and frightening to stand near. What took 100 men a season, one of those rigs could do in a single day, and that was the moment the small miner started losing his footing. Hydraulic mining didn't belong to lone men with pans and calloused hands. It took money, and lots of it. Investors back east, stockholders in San Francisco, engineers with schooling, survey maps, and figures scratched in notebooks instead of dirt. Lawyers came along too, men who understood claims and water rights and papers none of us had ever heard of. Companies bought land the way cattlemen bought grass, filed documents that turned creeks into property, and diverted water that had run free since before any white man ever set eyes on those hills. A man with a pan didn't stand much chance against a man with a deed, a judge, and a payroll, and most of us learned that the hard way. The gold came faster, no denying that, but it left ruin behind it. I can still see clear as day. Hydraulic mining didn't just dig, it destroyed. The waste, tailings they called it, poured down into the valleys until rivers filled with mud and gravel. Farms downstream were buried under silt thick enough to choke crops and kill orchards. Fences disappeared. Fields turned to marsh or stone. The Yuba River rose higher every year, not from rain but from mining debris, flooding towns that had never known floodwater before. Boats ran aground where channels used to be deep. Fish vanished. Drinking water turned foul, and livestock sickened. We used to joke that the rivers were turning solid, but it wasn't much of a joke when you watched a man lose land his family had worked for years. Folks like to say the West was ruled by gunfire, and sometimes it was. But most of the violence in those years came quiet. It came in eviction notices nailed to boards, hired deputies with orders in their pockets, and court rulings read aloud while a man stood there knowing he was finished. Small miners were pushed off claims they'd worked half their lives. Some were paid pennies.
Some were told to leave or be arrested. A few resisted. A few died. There were fights and riots, men cutting flumes and sabotaging ditches under cover of night, companies hiring guards, and tensions running hot. But money wears a man down faster than fear, and by the mid-1860s, most of us were gone, working for wages, or scratching at ground no company wanted. Back east, they said the gold rush was over, but that was a lie told for comfort. Gold was still coming out of California, more than ever in truth, but it no longer passed through the hands of the men who broke their backs to find it. It went straight into vaults and banks, into railroads and bonds and dividends. The rush didn't end. It changed owners. What finally slowed it weren't miners at all, but farmers. Down in the valleys, men who'd never panned a creek started losing everything to mess they didn't make. Their land buried, their homes flooded, their livelihoods drowned in mud and gravel. They organized, gathered proof, hired lawyers, and took the companies to court. And for the first time it felt like the land itself had found a voice.
Years later, a judge ruled that the mining companies couldn't dump their waste into rivers if it harmed others downstream. And just like that, hydraulic mining as we knew it died. Monitors went silent, towns emptied, and the hills were left scarred white and raw, wounds that never healed right, and still don't grow much of anything. The rivers eventually ran clearer, but they remember, and so do the buried towns and old maps. As for men like me, some went home, some stayed, some drank themselves into the dirt, and a few got rich enough to forget where they came from. Most didn't. People say the West was wild and lawless, but the truth is simpler and harder. For a brief time, regular men got ahead, and then they were outpaced by money, machinery, and law. Gold didn't ruin California so much as it organized it. And once that happened, there wasn't much room left for a man with a pan and a dream. I don't regret coming west, not for a moment, because I saw sunrises over untouched rivers and made friendships in mud and hope. But I wish folks would stop saying the gold rush just burned out. It didn't. It taught this country that wealth doesn't always follow work, and that sometimes the loudest force in a place isn't a gunshot or a shout, but the quiet closing of a ledger while the river keeps flowing on, long after the gold quit belonging to the men who first found it.